The promise of a new life can blind us to dangers lurking beneath calm waters. When Charlotte Webb stepped off the stagecoach into the muddy remains of Silver Creek, she carried only her valise, her mother's faded locket, and letters from a man who'd promised her shelter from the storms of life. She never imagined she would find her intended groom's town washed away by angry floodwaters, or that the man himself would be sitting in a military prison cell, accused of a murder that had shocked the entire territory. As Charlotte uncovers layers of deception that reach back decades, she finds herself drawn to the cavalry officer tasked with bringing her the grim news. Together, they must navigate treacherous waters where old hatreds run as deep as the river that destroyed Silver Creek, and where Charlotte's search for a husband may lead her into the crosshairs of a killer who has already claimed several victims. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stench of river mud and decay hung in the air as Charlotte Webb peered through the stagecoach window at what remained of Silver Creek, Wyoming territory. Rain-laden clouds stretched across the horizon, threatening another downpour, as if the heavens hadn't already unleashed enough destruction upon this small frontier settlement. "This can't be right," Charlotte murmured, clutching the worn envelope containing the latest letter from Nathan Blackwood, the man she'd agreed to marry after 8 months of correspondence. The driver, a weathered man with tobacco-stained teeth, spat onto the soggy ground as he opened the door. "Silver Creek, ma'am. What's left of it, anyway. Worst flood in 30 years came through last week, took half the town with it." Charlotte stepped down, her boots sinking into mud that threatened to swallow them whole. What had once been a main street was now a debris-strewn quagmire. Several buildings stood with their facades ripped away, exposing furniture and personal belongings like open dollhouses. Others were simply gone, leaving only foundations to mark their existence. "My fiancé," Charlotte said, voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain composed. "Nathan Blackwood, he runs the sawmill. Can you direct me there?" The driver's expression shifted, something like pity crossing his leathery features. "Sawmill's gone, ma'am. River took it first when the banks gave way." He hesitated. "Maybe check with Marshal Hayes's office, if it's still standing." Charlotte's heart pounded as she gathered her valise and a small trunk, all she had brought from her life in Boston. At 26, she'd been considered firmly on the shelf, her prospects diminished after her father's banking scandal had left the family name tarnished. Nathan's advertisement in the Eastern Herald had seemed like divine providence. Respected businessman seeks educated bride for companionship and assistance with correspondence. Age not important, character is. His letters had revealed a thoughtful, ambitious man who owned a prosperous sawmill in a growing settlement. He had written of building her a proper house with glass windows and a piano in the parlor. Now she stood in mud to her ankles, watching townsfolk salvage waterlogged possessions from the wreckage of their lives. "Excuse me?" Charlotte called, to a woman carrying a basket of sodden linens. "Could you point me toward Marshal Hayes's office?" The woman looked Charlotte up and down, taking in her travel-worn but clearly Eastern attire. "You're not from around here?" "No, I've come to—" Charlotte hesitated. How to explain that she had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to marry a man she'd never met, only to find his town in ruins? "I'm looking for Nathan Blackwood." The woman's face hardened, her knuckles whitening around the basket handle. Without a word, she turned and hurried away. Charlotte stood bewildered until a deep voice behind her said, "You'll find folks aren't eager to discuss Blackwood these days, ma'am." She turned to face a tall man in the mud-spattered blue uniform, of a cavalry officer. His dark hair was cropped short beneath his hat, and a jagged scar ran along his jawline, giving his otherwise handsome face a foreboding quality. "I'm Lieutenant Daniel Archer, 7th Cavalry," he said, removing his hat. "And you would be Miss Charlotte Webb, I presume?" Charlotte's breath caught. "How do you know my name?" I've been waiting for the eastbound stage. Marshal Hayes received a telegram from Boston inquiring about your safe arrival. His eyes, a startling shade of blue against his sun-browned skin, held something like regret. Miss Webb, I think you'd better come with me. There are matters regarding Mr. Blackwood that you need to be made aware of. A cold dread settled in Charlotte's stomach. Is he dead? Was he lost in the flood? No, ma'am. The flood's not what concerns Mr. Blackwood at present. Lieutenant Archer glanced around at the mud-covered street. This isn't a conversation for public ears. The marshal's office is still intact, though the jail behind it wasn't so fortunate. Charlotte followed the lieutenant through the devastation, stepping carefully around fallen beams and scattered merchandise from what had once been the general store. They passed a group of men reinforcing what remained of the bank with wooden supports, while others cleared debris from where the blacksmith's forge had stood. The marshal's office was one of the few structures still wholly intact, built as it was on slightly higher ground. Inside, a grey-haired man with a drooping mustache looked up from papers scattered across his desk. Marshal Hayes, Lieutenant Archer said. This is Miss Charlotte Webb. Hayes's expression cycled through surprise, recognition, and something like compassion. Miss Webb, you got here faster than we expected. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Please, sit down. Charlotte remained standing. Where is Nathan Blackwood? Hayes and Archer exchanged a glance before the marshal sighed. Miss Webb, I'm afraid Mr. Blackwood is being held at Fort Laramie, awaiting trial for the murder of Jonathan Spencer. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Charlotte's feet. Lieutenant Archer's hand at her elbow guided her to the chair. Murder? She whispered. There must be some mistake. I wish that were the case, Marshal Hayes said, pulling out a drawer and removing a bottle and glass. He poured amber liquid and pushed it toward her. For the shock, ma'am. Charlotte ignored the whiskey. I don't understand. Who is Jonathan? Spencer was, Archer corrected gently. Spencer was Blackwood's business partner. His body was found 3 days before the flood, with his throat cut and a ledger missing from his office. Charlotte shook her head. Nathan never mentioned a partner in his letters. There's likely a great deal Blackwood didn't mention in his letters, Marshal Hayes said, his tone hardening. Spencer owned half the sawmill, and they'd been quarreling over finances for months. Multiple witnesses heard Blackwood threaten Spencer the night before he was killed. That's circumstantial, Charlotte found herself saying, her father's legal discussions at dinner parties suddenly relevant. Arguments don't prove murder. No, ma'am, Lieutenant Archer agreed, but the bloody saw blade found hidden in Blackwood's home does make a compelling case. Charlotte's mind raced. The man she had come to marry, whose articulate, thoughtful letters she had read repeatedly during the long journey west, was accused of slitting his business partner's throat. It was incomprehensible. I need to see him, she said firmly. Miss Webb, Marshal Hayes began, I don't think I've traveled nearly 2,000 miles to marry this man. I deserve to hear from his own lips what has happened. Lieutenant Archer studied her with something like respect. Fort Laramie is a 3-day ride from here, Miss Webb, and conditions between here and there aren't favorable since the flood. I'm stronger than I look, Lieutenant. Charlotte straightened her spine. And I didn't come all this way to turn back at the first sign of difficulty. The Army maintains an outpost a half-day's ride from here, Archer said. I'm returning there tonight, then heading to Fort Laramie in the morning. You could accompany me, though I must warn you it won't be a comfortable journey. Marshal Hayes frowned. Archer, you can't be serious about taking a lady through that terrain. The bridges are washed out, and there have been reports of Harkin's gang sighted near Cooper's Ridge. Harkin's gang? Charlotte asked. Outlaws, Hayes explained. They prey on travelers and small settlements, been causing trouble throughout the territory for years. Lieutenant Archer's jaw tightened. All the more reason Miss Webb shouldn't remain in what's left of Silver Creek, unprotected. Most of the townsfolk have relocated to higher ground or left the area entirely. The marshal couldn't argue with that logic. Where will she stay tonight? The widow Patterson's boarding house survived, Archer replied. It's on the far side of town, away from the river. I've already arranged for a room, assuming Miss Webb would need accommodations upon arrival. Charlotte's head spun with the rapid developments. Just hours ago, her greatest concern had been making a good first impression on her future husband. Now he stood accused of murder, his town lay in ruins, and she would be traveling to a military fort with a scarred cavalry officer she had just met. "Thank you, Lieutenant," she said, finding her voice. "I accept your escort to Fort Laramie." Archer nodded. "We'll depart at first light. The widow's place is this way, if you're ready." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As they stepped back into the muddy street, Charlotte noticed a group of men watching them from across what had once been the town square. One of them, a barrel-chested figure with a shock of white hair, spat on the ground as they passed. "That's Victor Reynolds," Archer said quietly. "He owns the largest cattle operation in the territory. His men have been helping with the recovery effort for a price." "What sort of price?" Charlotte asked. "The kind that leaves people in debt to him for years. Reynolds has been trying to buy out smaller properties around Silver Creek for some time. The flood has given him the opportunity he's been waiting for." Charlotte studied Reynolds as they walked. Even at a distance, there was something predatory in his stance. Did he have dealings with Nathan? More than dealings. They've been at odds for years over water rights to Reynolds Creek, which feeds the mill pond. Without access to that water, Blackwood's sawmill would have been worthless. A new thought struck Charlotte with alarming clarity. "Lieutenant, is it possible that Mr. Reynolds might have had reason to wish Mr. Spencer dead? Perhaps to frame Nathan and gain control of the water rights?" Archer's eyes narrowed. "That's quite a leap of logic, Miss Webb. Is it? You just said he's taking advantage of the flood to acquire properties. Would murder be so different?" The lieutenant remained silent for several steps. "Marshal Hayes investigated thoroughly. The evidence against Blackwood is substantial." "Evidence can be manipulated," Charlotte countered, thinking again of her father's disgrace. He had been framed by his business partner, his signature forged on documents that had sent him to prison and left his family destitute. It had taught Charlotte a valuable lesson about appearances versus reality. "You seem determined to believe in Blackwood's innocence, despite never having met the man," Archer observed. "I know his character through his letters," Charlotte said. "In 8 months of correspondence, not once did he show himself to be anything but honorable and forthright." Archer's expression softened marginally. "I hope, for your sake, that your assessment proves correct." They had reached a 2-story white clapboard house set back from the road, miraculously untouched by the flood's destruction. A sign reading Patterson Boarding House hung by the entrance. A stout woman with silver-streaked hair opened the door before they reached it. "Lieutenant Archer," she greeted, then turned curious eyes to Charlotte. "And this must be Miss Webb." "Widow Patterson," Archer confirmed. "Miss Webb will need that room for tonight." Of course. Come in, dear. You look like you've had quite a shock." The widow ushered Charlotte inside, casting a significant glance at Archer. "Will you join us for supper, Lieutenant?" "Thank you, but I have matters to attend to before we depart tomorrow." He tipped his hat to Charlotte. "I'll return at dawn, Miss Webb." As the lieutenant turned to leave, Charlotte called after him. "Lieutenant Archer, why were you assigned to meet me? Surely escorting a mail-order bride isn't cavalry business." Archer paused, his expression unreadable. "Nathan Blackwood and I served together during the war. Despite our differences since then, I owe him this courtesy." Without further explanation, he strode away. The widow showed Charlotte to a small but clean room on the second floor. Hot water for washing will be up shortly, and supper's at 6. She hesitated at the door. You should know, Miss Webb, that opinion in Silver Creek is divided about Nathan Blackwood. Some folks believe he's innocent of Spencer's murder. And what do you believe, Mrs. Patterson? The widow sighed. I believe Nathan Blackwood is a man with secrets, like most who come west to start over. Whether those secrets include murder, I couldn't say. She met Charlotte's gaze directly. But I do know that Jonathan Spencer was not the upstanding citizen some claim. That man had shadows in his past as dark as any in Silver Creek. After the widow departed, Charlotte sank onto the bed, exhaustion from the journey and the day's revelations catching up with her. She removed Nathan's letters from her valise, rereading his most recent correspondence. Had she missed some clue, some hint of the troubles he faced? The letter, dated just 3 weeks earlier, mentioned expansion plans for the sawmill and his excitement about her imminent arrival. One passage stood out now with new significance. I have discovered matters that may change our future in ways I hadn't anticipated. When you arrive, there is much we must discuss. Charlotte traced her fingers over his neat handwriting. What had Nathan discovered? Was it connected to Spencer's murder? And why had Lieutenant Archer been so deliberately vague about his relationship with her intended groom? As twilight descended on the remains of Silver Creek, Charlotte stood at her window, watching military wagons distribute supplies to flood survivors. In one of them, Lieutenant Archer directed men unloading barrels of flour and salt pork. His movements were efficient, his manner commanding. For a moment, he glanced up at her window, their eyes meeting briefly across the distance. Charlotte stepped back, unsettled by the intensity of his gaze. Tomorrow, they would begin the journey to Fort Laramie, where she would finally meet the man she had traveled so far to marry, a man now accused of slitting his partner's throat. Charlotte touched her mother's locket, drawing strength from the familiar weight of it around her neck. She had come west seeking security and a fresh start. Instead, she found destruction, suspicion, and a mystery that seemed to deepen with each passing hour. As rain began to fall once more on the ravaged town, Charlotte made a silent vow. She would discover the truth about Nathan Blackwood, no matter where that truth might lead her. Dawn broke with uncertain light as Charlotte secured her hair beneath a practical bonnet. She had replaced her travel-worn dress with her sturdiest skirt and jacket, clothes she'd packed for setting up housekeeping, not for a desperate ride to a military fort. A soft knock at her door revealed Mrs. Patterson bearing a tray with coffee and biscuits. "Lieutenant Archer is downstairs," the widow said. "He's brought a horse for you." "Thank you for your kindness," Charlotte replied, accepting the warm mug gratefully. Mrs. Patterson hesitated. "I've packed provisions for your journey," her voice lowered, "and I've included something else you might find useful." She withdrew a small revolver from her pocket. "It was my late husband's. 5 shots, and it's already loaded." Charlotte stared at the weapon. "Mrs. Patterson, I couldn't. The trail to Fort Laramie crosses difficult country, especially now with the flooding, and with Harkin's gang about." She pressed the revolver into Charlotte's hands. "Take it. Better to have it and not need it." Downstairs, Lieutenant Archer waited by the door, his uniform replaced by practical riding clothes, though his military bearing remained unmistakable. A rifle was secured to his saddle outside, alongside saddlebags that looked well stocked for the journey. "You're punctual," he noted with approval. "That will serve us well. We need to make the outpost by nightfall." "I'm ready, Lieutenant." Charlotte tucked Mrs. Patterson's revolver into her carpet-bag, then turned to thank the widow once more. As they mounted their horses, Charlotte on a gentle mare Archer had procured, dawn fully illuminated what remained of Silver Creek. In daylight, the destruction was even more apparent. The church steeple lay toppled across what had once been the schoolhouse. Makeshift tents dotted the hillside where those who hadn't fled outright had moved to escape further flooding. "Was there warning?" Charlotte asked as they rode past the ruined sawmill. Only the stone foundation and parts of the water wheel remained, the rest washed downstream by the raging waters. "Some," Archer replied. "A rider came from upriver reporting heavy rains in the mountains, but the dam at Cooper's Lake was supposed to hold. When it broke, the wave hit Silver Creek within the hour." Cooper's Lake. I don't recall Nathan mentioning a dam in his letters. Archer's expression tightened. The dam was Reynolds's project, built 3 years ago to create a reservoir for his cattle operation. Local engineers warned it wasn't constructed properly, but Reynolds has friends in the territorial government. Charlotte processed this information. So Reynolds is responsible for the flood? Technically, the unprecedented rainfall caused the dam to fail, but yes, had it been built to proper specifications, Silver Creek might still be standing. They followed what remained of the road east, skirting washed-out sections and fording small streams that had once been dry creek beds. Archer remained vigilant, one hand never far from his revolver as they travelled. By mid-morning, they had left the immediate destruction behind, though evidence of the flood's passage remained in debris caught in trees and water-scoured banks. "You mentioned serving with Nathan during the war," Charlotte ventured, after they paused to rest the horses. "Were you close?" Archer secured his canteen before answering. "We served in the same unit at Antietam and Gettysburg. I wouldn't say we were friends exactly. Blackwood kept to himself, but he was a good soldier, steady under fire, yet you don't seem convinced of his innocence. I've seen war change men, Miss Webb. Sometimes the changes aren't visible until years later." He mounted his horse. "We should continue. This next stretch is exposed." They rode in silence until midday, when Archer led them to a sheltered hollow with a small spring. As Charlotte refreshed herself, the lieutenant scouted the surrounding area, returning with a troubled expression. "There are fresh tracks heading south, at least 6 riders. Could be Harkin's men. We should take an alternate route to the outpost." "You believe they're watching the main trail?" Archer nodded grimly. "Harkin's gang targets army payrolls and supply wagons. They've become more brazen since the flood, with law enforcement stretched thin. This, Robert Harkin, sounds like a significant problem. Why hasn't the army dealt with him?" "The army's primary concern is maintaining peace with the Sioux and Cheyenne. Civilian law enforcement handles outlaws unless they directly interfere with military operations." Archer checked his rifle. "That said, capturing Harkin would advance many officers' careers. He's evaded pursuit for 3 years now." They took a winding path through dense woodland, adding miles to their journey, but avoiding the exposed ridge where Archer had spotted the tracks. By late afternoon, storm clouds gathered again and thunder rumbled in the distance. "There's an abandoned cabin ahead," Archer said, as fat raindrops began to fall. "We can shelter there until this passes." The cabin was little more than a hunter's shack, a single room with a stone fireplace and crude furnishings, but it was dry. Archer quickly built a small fire while Charlotte arranged their provisions on a rough-hewn table. "You're quite adept at frontier living for a Boston lady," Archer observed as she efficiently organized their meal. "My family's circumstances changed dramatically when I was 16, Charlotte replied, slicing jerky and dried apples. "My father was a bank president who went to prison for fraud, crimes he didn't commit. My mother and I learned to manage with far less than we were accustomed to." Archer's expression softened. "I apologize for presuming." "No offense taken, Lieutenant. Many assume that because I came west as a mail-order bride, I must be desperate or naive. The truth is more practical. With my family name tarnished, my prospects in Boston were limited. Nathan's advertisement offered independence and purpose." She hesitated. His letters revealed a thoughtful man building something meaningful, not someone capable of murder. "May I ask what he wrote about Silver Creek and his business?" Charlotte retrieved the letters from her bag, selecting one from the previous autumn. He described the town as growing steadily with a church, school, and thriving commerce. The sawmill was meeting increased demand from new settlements throughout the territory. She frowned. There's no mention of a business partner. Spencer became involved about 6 months ago, Archer explained. He arrived with capital to expand the operation just when Blackwood needed it most. Because of the dispute with Reynolds over water rights? Archer nodded. Reynolds had begun diverting more water to his reservoir, leaving the sawmill with insufficient flow. Blackwood needed funds for legal proceedings and to modify the mill to operate with less water. Thunder cracked overhead and rain intensified, drumming on the cabin's roof. Archer added wood to the fire, his scarred profile illuminated by the flames. "How did you get that scar, if you don't mind my asking?" Charlotte ventured. Archer's hand unconsciously touched his jaw. "Andersonville Prison. I was captured at Cold Harbor in '64, spent 8 months there before the war ended." Charlotte's eyes widened. "You survived Andersonville? I read accounts of the conditions there." "Words can't capture it," Archer said quietly. "Over 13,000 men didn't make it out. I was fortunate." "Was Nathan there as well?" "No. He was wounded at Petersburg, sent home before the surrender." Archer stared into the fire. "We didn't meet again until I was assigned to Fort Laramie 3 years ago. He'd already established himself in Silver Creek by then." Charlotte sensed there was more to the story than Archer was revealing, but before she could press further, a sound outside the cabin froze them both. The distinct crack of a branch, too deliberate to be natural. Archer extinguished the lamp with a swift movement, plunging the cabin into relative darkness, illuminated only by the fire's glow. He drew his revolver, motioning for Charlotte to move away from the windows. "Take this," he whispered, passing her a cavalry carbine from his saddle gear. "If anything happens to me, there's a box of ammunition in the left saddlebag. The outpost is northeast, following the creek. Captain Ellis will arrange your transport to Fort Laramie." Charlotte's heart hammered as she accepted the weapon, grateful now for the shooting lessons her father had insisted upon during her youth. Together they waited in silence as footsteps circled the cabin. A low whistle sounded, followed by a man's voice. "We know you're in there, Lieutenant Archer. No need for unpleasantness. We just want the woman." Archer's expression hardened. "Miss Webb, when I engage them, I need you to slip out the back window and make for the horses. They're tethered in the ravine behind the cabin." "I won't leave you to face them alone," Charlotte whispered fiercely. "This isn't a debate. I can't protect you and fight them simultaneously." The door rattled as someone tested its strength. "Last chance, Lieutenant. Send out the mail-order bride, and you can ride away intact." Archer met Charlotte's eyes. "On my signal." He raised his voice. "There's no woman here. I'm alone, waiting out the storm." Laughter answered him. "Our friend in Silver Creek saw you. Leave with her this morning. We know she's Nathan Blackwood's intended. She's our ticket to ensuring his cooperation." Charlotte felt cold realization wash over her. These weren't random bandits. They wanted her specifically to use against Nathan. "In about 5 seconds, Archer said calmly. "I'm going to fire through that window. The moment I do, run. Don't stop until you reach the outpost." Before Charlotte could protest again, the cabin's door splintered inward. Archer fired twice in rapid succession, and a man screamed in pain. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, shattering the windows and sending splinters flying from the cabin walls. Charlotte found herself pressed against the floor behind the stone hearth, the carbine clutched in white-knuckled hands. Archer fired methodically, changing position between shots to confuse their attackers about his location. When the firing momentarily ceased, he dropped to a crouch beside her. 4 men minimum, too many to fight off indefinitely. His left arm was bleeding from a graze. "The rear window is our only chance. I'll provide covering fire. "Lieutenant," Charlotte gripped his sleeve, "these men know something about Nathan. They said I'm their ticket to his cooperation." "What does that mean?" Archer's expression revealed nothing. "It means we need to get you to Fort Laramie immediately. Ready?" On his count, Archer unleashed a barrage toward the cabin's front, while Charlotte slipped through the rear window into the pouring rain. The horses startled at her approach, but remained where they were tethered. She had just untied them when a massive figure loomed through the darkness. "Well now, what have we here?" The man's voice was surprisingly cultured for his rough appearance. "Miss Webb, I presume. Robert Harkin, at your service." He swept an exaggerated bow, rainwater streaming from his wide-brimmed hat. Charlotte raised the carbine, but Harkin was faster, knocking it aside with a walking stick she hadn't noticed. Now, let's be civilized. I have a proposition that benefits us both." From the cabin, gunfire continued, punctuated by shouts. Harkin seemed unconcerned. "My men will keep the good lieutenant occupied while we have our chat." "I have nothing to say to you," Charlotte declared, trying to gauge whether she could reach Mrs. Patterson's revolver in her carpet bag. "But I have much to say to you about Nathan Blackwood and the real reason he's awaiting trial at Fort Laramie." Harkin's smile was predatory. "Your intended groom isn't what he appears to be, Miss Webb. The murder charge is merely a convenience, a way to get him into custody without revealing the true investigation." Charlotte's confusion must have shown, for Harkin continued with, "Evident satisfaction. Nathan Blackwood is suspected of being the infamous Ghost Rider, the mastermind who has orchestrated every major stagecoach and payroll robbery in the territory for the past 5 years. "That's absurd," Charlotte retorted. "Nathan owns a legitimate business." A perfect cover. And Spencer discovered it, which is why he had to die. Harkin moved closer. "But what no one except myself, and now you, knows is that Spencer was blackmailing Blackwood. He wasn't a victim. He was a co-conspirator who got greedy." A shot rang out from behind Harkin, and he staggered forward with a grunt of pain. Lieutenant Archer emerged from the shadows, his revolver trained on the outlaw leader. "Step away from her, Harkin." The outlaw recovered his balance, blood seeping from his shoulder. "Lieutenant Archer, still fighting other men's battles, I see." His gaze flickered between them. "Did you tell her about your history with Blackwood? The real reason you're so interested in his mail-order bride?" "Shut your mouth, or I'll shut it permanently," Archer growled. Harkin laughed. "Such hostility. Miss Webb deserves the truth before she commits herself to a man's cause." He addressed Charlotte again. "Ask the lieutenant why he really escorted you. Ask him about Sarah Mitchell." Archer's next shot would have taken Harkin between the eyes if the outlaw hadn't ducked behind a tree with surprising agility for a wounded man. "Miss Webb, mount up," Archer commanded, firing again to keep Harkin pinned down. Charlotte scrambled onto her horse as gunfire erupted from the direction of the cabin. Harkin's men had realized their leader was in danger. Archer swung into his saddle, and they galloped into the storm-darkened forest, bullets splintering bark around them. They rode hard for nearly an hour, the sounds of pursuit gradually fading behind them. Rain continued to fall, reducing visibility to mere yards, but Archer navigated confidently, following landmarks only he could discern in the gloom. When they finally slowed to rest the winded horses, Charlotte demanded answers. Who is Sarah Mitchell? And what did Harkin mean about Nathan being the Ghost Rider? Archer dismounted, checking his horse's leg where it had stumbled during their escape. Harkin is an outlaw and a liar. His words aren't worth consideration. Yet you reacted rather extremely when he mentioned this woman. Charlotte remained on her horse, looking down at him. Lieutenant Archer, I am riding into increasingly dangerous situations with you, and men are trying to abduct me for reasons connected to my intended husband. I believe I've earned some honesty. Archer's jaw worked as he debated internally. Finally he sighed. Sarah Mitchell was my sister. She came west as a mail-order bride 5 years ago, answering an advertisement remarkably similar to the one that brought you here. She was to marry Nathan? Charlotte asked, stunned. No, a man calling himself Frederick Logan. She traveled to meet him in Dawson's Creek, about 40 miles from Silver Creek. Archer's voice became hollow. She never arrived. The stagecoach was attacked by bandits. All passengers were killed, the strongbox taken. The Ghost Rider, Charlotte whispered. That's what the newspapers called him. No one knew his identity, just that he somehow had information about which coaches carried significant valuables. Archer looked up at her, his eyes haunted. 3 months after Sarah's murder, Nathan Blackwood established his sawmill in Silver Creek with a surprising amount of capital for a former soldier. Charlotte felt as though the ground were shifting beneath her. You believe Nathan is responsible for your sister's death, that he's the Ghost Rider? I have no proof, but the timing was suspicious, and Blackwood's background before arriving in Wyoming is conveniently vague. Archer's expression hardened. When I learned another mail-order bride was coming to marry him, I requested the assignment of meeting your stage. History has a way of repeating itself, Miss Webb. I wasn't about to let another innocent woman disappear. Yet you said nothing of these suspicions to me. You were taking me directly to him, under military escort, with full awareness of who and what he might be, Archer countered. And now that he's in custody awaiting trial for Spencer's murder, you'd be protected while I continued my investigation? Charlotte's mind raced, fitting together pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed until now. And Harkin? How does he fit into this? Harkin is an opportunistic vulture. If Blackwood is indeed the Ghost Rider, they would be rivals in the same territory. Harkin would benefit from his removal. Archer mounted his horse again. We need to reach the outpost before full dark. We've lost enough time. As they rode through the deepening gloom, Charlotte's thoughts tumbled in disarray. The man whose letters had given her hope for a new beginning stood accused not just of murdering his business partner, but potentially of being an infamous bandit, responsible for multiple deaths, including the sister of the very man escorting her to Fort Laramie. Yet something about Archer's theory didn't align with the thoughtful, detailed letters Nathan had written. Would a hardened criminal take the time to describe the spring wildflowers or his plans for a garden where Charlotte might grow the herbs she'd mentioned enjoying in Boston? Lieutenant, she said as they crested a ridge and saw lamplight in the distance, the outpost at last. Regardless of your suspicions, I still intend to meet Nathan Blackwood and hear his side of this story. Archer's expression was grim in the gathering darkness. I expected nothing less, Miss Webb. Just remember that the most dangerous wolves often wear the most convincing sheep's clothing. The cavalry outpost appeared through the rain as a collection of sturdy log buildings surrounded by a wooden palisade. As they approached the gate, a sentry called out for identification. Lieutenant Daniel Archer, 7th Cavalry, with civilian escort. Charlotte Webb, Archer responded, his voice carrying authority despite their bedraggled appearance. The gates swung open to reveal a muddy yard where soldiers hurried to take their horses. Captain Ellis, a mustached officer with graying temples, emerged from the command building, surprise evident on his weathered face. Archer, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow. His gaze shifted to Charlotte, taking in her sodden appearance, with concern. Miss Webb, I presume, you've had quite a journey, it seems. Harkin's men ambushed us at the old trapper's cabin, Archer reported tersely. 6 men, possibly more. Harkin himself was present. Ellis's eyebrows rose. Harkin? That's unusual. He typically sends his lieutenants for ambushes. He wanted Miss Webb specifically. Archer's tone conveyed the significance of this detail. He knew who she was and her connection to Blackwood. The captain's expression darkened. Inside, both. Of you, this conversation shouldn't happen in the open. As Charlotte followed the officers into the warm, lamp-lit building, she felt the weight of each revelation settling upon her shoulders. What had begun as a journey toward marriage had become entangled in a web of murder, banditry, and personal vendetta. Tomorrow they would continue to Fort Laramie, where Nathan Blackwood awaited trial. Only then would she discover whether the man whose words had won her heart was indeed the thoughtful, honorable person she believed him to be, or a murderous outlaw who had lured her west for purposes yet unknown. The military outpost provided Charlotte with her first proper rest since arriving in Wyoming Territory. Though the accommodations were sparse, a narrow cot in a storage room hastily converted for her use. The solid walls and armed sentries allowed her to sleep without fear of Harkin's men. Morning brought clear skies and the scent of coffee and bacon from the mess hall. Charlotte had just finished brushing out her hair when a knock sounded at her door. A young soldier stood outside, cap in hand. "Captain Ellis requests your presence in the command office, ma'am." She found the captain and Lieutenant Archer bent over a map, their expressions grave. Ellis straightened when she entered. "Miss Webb, I hope you rested well. We've received troubling news that affects your journey." "More flooding?" Charlotte asked, accepting the coffee Archer silently offered. "No, a telegram from Fort Laramie." Ellis handed her a yellow slip of paper. "There was an incident involving Blackwood." Charlotte read quickly, her hands growing cold despite the warm mug. "An escape attempt? That can't be right." According to the telegram, Nathan Blackwood had overcome a guard during the night and attempted to flee the fort. He'd been recaptured, but not before seriously wounding the soldier who'd tried to stop him. "Lieutenant Archer will still escort you to Fort Laramie," Ellis said, "but the commanding officer there, Colonel Winters, has restricted access to Blackwood. He's now considered dangerous." "This makes no sense," Charlotte insisted. "The man whose letters I received wouldn't attack a soldier." "Perhaps the man who wrote those letters and the man in custody are not the same," Archer suggested, his words carefully neutral. Charlotte's indignation flared. "You've believed him guilty from the start, Lieutenant. I wonder if your judgment is clouded by your personal tragedy." Captain Ellis glanced between them, sensing the tension. "Whatever the case, you'll need to delay your departure." A patrol reported Harkin's men watching the main trail to Fort Laramie. "We're sending scouts to find a secure route." "How long?" Charlotte asked. 2 days, possibly 3. Ellis rolled up the map. "In the meantime, you'll remain here under the Army's protection." After the captain dismissed them, Archer accompanied Charlotte across the muddy yard. "You believe I'm persecuting an innocent man because of what happened to my sister," he said abruptly. Charlotte met his gaze. "I believe you have strong reasons to suspect Nathan, but suspicion isn't proof. I need to see him myself, to ask the questions that matter, and if the answers aren't what you hope to hear, then I'll face that truth when I must." She looked around the busy outpost. "If I'm to be here for several days, I'd prefer to make myself useful, rather than hide in that storage room." Archer studied her with renewed respect. "The doctor could use assistance in the infirmary. We have 3 men injured in the flood relief efforts." The infirmary occupied one of the larger buildings, its windows open to the fresh air. Inside, an older man with spectacles and a military medic's badge directed a young soldier in changing bandages. "Dr. Abernathy," Archer called, "this is Miss Charlotte Webb. She's offered to assist while awaiting safe passage to Fort Laramie." The doctor assessed her with kind but shrewd eyes. "Any experience with the wounded Miss Webb?" I volunteered. "In a Boston charity hospital for 3 years, Charlotte replied. After her father's imprisonment, many doors had closed to her family, but the Sisters of Mercy had welcomed her help regardless of her tarnished name." Dr. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "We'll put you to work immediately. The lieutenant can retrieve you at mealtime. For the next several hours, Charlotte lost herself in familiar tasks, changing dressings, preparing herbal compresses, and reading to a young private whose broken legs kept him confined to bed. The routine was comforting after days of upheaval and shocking revelations. "You have a gentle touch," the doctor commented, as they organized supplies later that afternoon. "These men could use more of that. Army medicine tends toward the efficient rather than the compassionate." "My mother always said healing happens faster when the patient knows someone cares," Charlotte replied, rolling bandages. She hesitated, then added, "Doctor, may I ask about a patient who might have been treated here in the past? A woman named Sarah Mitchell?" Abernathy's hand stilled. "Sarah? Lieutenant Archer's sister?" His expression grew solemn. "I wasn't stationed here then, but I heard the story. Terrible business, that stagecoach massacre. They brought the bodies here before burial." Bodies, plural. Yes, Sarah, the driver, a banker from Cheyenne, and another woman, Margaret Wilson. I believe all killed by the Ghost Riders gang. Charlotte absorbed this information. Were there any survivors? One, a young man, was thrown from the stage during the attack, found wandering delirious 2 days later. Abernathy placed bottles of antiseptic in a cabinet. Though survival may be too generous a term, his mind never recovered from the trauma. He resides at the Territorial Asylum in Cheyenne now. What was his name? Louis Baker, if memory serves. The doctor glanced at her curiously. "Why these questions, Miss Webb?" Charlotte chose her words carefully. "Lieutenant Archer mentioned his sister's death. I'm trying to understand all the connections between various events, including Nathan. Blackwood's arrest." Abernathy's perception was keen. "Rumors travel even to outpost infirmaries, Miss Webb. I know you came to marry him. Do you believe he's guilty of murdering Jonathan Spencer?" The doctor considered this. "I treated Blackwood once, about 2 years ago. He'd injured his hand at the sawmill. He struck me as a serious, intelligent man. Intense, certainly, but not violent by nature." He shrugged. "But men contain multitudes. The most gentle soul can harbor darkness if pushed beyond endurance." Charlotte was about to press further when Lieutenant Archer appeared at the infirmary door. "Miss Webb, there's someone here you should meet." Following him to the command building, Charlotte was surprised to find a woman waiting inside. She was perhaps 50, with steel-grey hair and the weathered complexion of someone who had spent decades under the western sun. Her clothing was plain, but well-made, and she carried herself with dignity. "This is Martha Spencer," Archer introduced her, "Jonathan Spencer's widow." Charlotte's surprise must have shown, for Mrs. Spencer offered a tired smile. "I imagine you didn't know Jonathan." "Was married, Miss Webb. Few in Silver Creek did. We maintained separate residences." "Mrs. Spencer arrived during the night," Archer explained. "She was traveling to Fort Laramie to attend Blackwood's trial when the flooding forced her to detour here. I understand you're Nathan Blackwood's." "Intended," Mrs. Spencer said, studying Charlotte intently. "Those circumstances have complicated that arrangement." "They have indeed," Charlotte acknowledged. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Spencer." The woman's expression hardened slightly. "Are you? You've never met my husband, yet you're prepared to marry the man accused of killing him." "I don't believe Nathan is guilty," Charlotte said firmly. "Then you're either naive or willfully blind. Nathan Blackwood slit my husband's throat and stole documents that would have exposed his criminal activities." Mrs. Spencer removed a folded paper from her reticule. "This was on my husband's desk. A copy of the last page he added to the ledger missing since his murder." Charlotte accepted the paper, with Archer looking over her shoulder. It appeared to be a financial record, showing large deposits into the sawmill's accounts that far exceeded what lumber sales could justify. "Jonathan discovered Blackwood was using the sawmill to launder money from the Ghost Riders' robberies," Mrs. Spencer continued. "When confronted, Blackwood murdered him to protect his secret." If your husband had evidence of criminal activity, why not take it to Marshal Hayes? Charlotte asked. He intended to, but he needed more proof. The night he was killed, he told me he finally had what he needed. Mrs. Spencer's voice wavered. We were going to leave Silver Creek together. Start fresh elsewhere with the reward money for identifying the Ghost Rider. Archer's attention had fixed on a notation at the bottom of the page. These dates, he said slowly, they correspond with 3 major robberies attributed to the Ghost Rider, including the Army payroll theft last winter. Precisely. Mrs. Spencer nodded. Jonathan tracked the deposits. Every major robbery was followed by an unexplained influx of cash into the sawmill's accounts. Charlotte studied the document, seeking any flaw in its logic. Mrs. Spencer, how long were you and Jonathan married? 15 years. We came west from Pennsylvania after the war. Then you knew him during Nathan's military service. Did they know each other then? Mrs. Spencer hesitated, briefly glancing at Archer. No, they met here in Wyoming. But the slight pause had caught Charlotte's attention. You're certain of that? It seems unlikely that 2 men from the same regiment would coincidentally become business partners years later in a remote territory. It's a small world, Miss Webb, Mrs. Spencer replied coolly. Coincidences occur, especially among veterans who sought opportunity in the West. Charlotte wasn't satisfied. Lieutenant Archer, you served with Nathan. Did Jonathan Spencer also serve in your unit? Not to my knowledge, Archer said. But I didn't know every man in the regiment. An orderly interrupted, informing them that Captain Ellis required the lieutenant's presence immediately. After Archer excused himself, an uncomfortable silence settled between the 2 women. You're determined to believe in Blackwood's innocence, Mrs. Spencer finally said, despite the evidence, despite his escape attempt. I believe there's more to this story than I've been told, Charlotte countered. For instance, why was my stagecoach met by soldiers rather than regular law enforcement? Why Robert Harkin seems personally interested in me, and why you, a grieving widow, travelled alone through dangerous territory to attend a trial when most women would send a male representative. Mrs. Spencer's expression turned calculating. You're more perceptive than I expected, Miss Webb. Perhaps Nathan chose better than he knew. Chose me? For what purpose? That's what I've been trying to determine. Mrs. Spencer moved to the window, watching soldiers drill in the yard. Nathan. Blackwood contacted 4 mail-order bride services in the past year. You're the 3rd woman to respond. Charlotte felt as though the floor had shifted beneath her feet. The 3rd. What happened to the others? The 1st changed her mind before leaving Boston. The 2nd. Mrs. Spencer turned back to her. Disappeared. Between Cheyenne and Silver Creek 3 months ago. The stagecoach was found abandoned. The horses gone. No bodies, no belongings, nothing. Just like Sarah Mitchell 5 years ago, Charlotte whispered. Exactly like Sarah Mitchell. Mrs. Spencer's eyes narrowed. Except this time, Blackwood was the intended groom, not a victim. Curious, wouldn't you say? Charlotte's mind raced, trying to connect these new pieces to an increasingly complex puzzle. Are you suggesting Nathan arranged the attack on his own bride-to-be? That makes no sense. Unless she learned something she shouldn't have. Or unless the bride was never the point. Mrs. Spencer stepped closer. Tell me, Miss Webb, did you bring anything valuable with you? Family heirlooms, securities, bonds? No. My family's fortunes diminished years ago. Then perhaps it was someone else on that stage who mattered. Someone who might have been carrying something worth stealing. Mrs. Spencer reached for the doorknob. Consider all angles, Miss Webb. The man who wrote those charming letters may be a carefully constructed fiction. After Mrs. Spencer departed, Charlotte remained alone in the office, her thoughts in turmoil. Each revelation seemed to cast Nathan in a more sinister light, yet inconsistencies nagged at her. If he were truly the Ghost Rider, Why draw attention by killing Spencer? Why arrange for a mail-order bride at all? And if the second bride had disappeared under suspicious circumstances, why would Charlotte have been encouraged to come? The telegram reporting Nathan's escape attempt lay on Captain Ellis's desk. Charlotte picked it up, reading it again carefully. Something about its wording troubled her. It reported that Blackwood had overcome a guard and attempted to flee, but provided no details about how a presumably disarmed prisoner had managed this feat. Voices approached outside, and Charlotte quickly replaced the telegram. Lieutenant Archer entered with Captain Ellis, both men looking grim. "We've received word from our scouts," Ellis announced. "Harkin's men have established checkpoints on all major trails to Fort Laramie. They're stopping and searching for all travelers." "Looking for me," Charlotte said, not a question. Archer nodded. "We believe so. This goes beyond typical bandit behavior. Harkin is expending significant resources to intercept you specifically, which supports the theory that you are somehow key to Blackwood's situation," Ellis added. "Whether as leverage against him or for some other purpose, we haven't yet determined." "Then time is working against us," Charlotte said decisively. "I need to reach Fort Laramie as soon as possible, before whatever Harkin fears I might discover becomes irrelevant." "There is one route they may not be watching," Archer said reluctantly, "through Campbell's Pass. It's dangerous terrain, especially after the flooding, but it would put us at Fort Laramie within 2 days. Ellis shook his head. "Campbell's Pass is too risky. The last patrol that tried it lost 2 men to a rock slide. With respect, Captain, waiting here only increases the danger to Miss Webb and to your command." Archer's tone was firm. "Harkin doesn't typically challenge the army directly, but with stakes this high, he might risk it," Charlotte interjected before Ellis could respond. "I've just spoken with Mrs. Spencer. Did you know there was another bride before me? One who disappeared 3 months ago?" Both men stared at her. "What?" Archer demanded. "According to Mrs. Spencer, a woman responded to Nathan's advertisement earlier this year. She vanished between Cheyenne and Silver Creek." Charlotte watched their reactions closely. "Just like your sister, Lieutenant, except this time Nathan was the intended groom." Ellis sank into his chair. "This changes matters if Blackwood is connected to multiple disappearances." "We don't know that he is," Charlotte insisted. "Mrs. Spencer has reason to believe the worst of the man accused of killing her husband. But what if Nathan is being framed? What if Spencer was the one with secrets to hide?" "You're reaching, Miss Webb," Ellis said gently. "The evidence against Blackwood is substantial." "Is it? A bloody saw blade found in his home. Convenient. Financial records, and now a suspicious escape attempt?" Charlotte paced the small office. "I've seen an innocent man condemned before, Captain. My father went to prison for fraud he didn't commit, based on forged documents and a partner's testimony." Archer studied her intently. "What are you suggesting?" "That nothing here is as straightforward as it appears. That we may all be pieces in a game whose rules we don't understand." Charlotte turned to Ellis. "Captain, I need to see Louis Baker." "Who?" Ellis frowned. "The survivor from the stagecoach attack that killed Sarah Mitchell. Dr. Abernathy mentioned he's in the asylum at Cheyenne." Archer's expression darkened. "Louis Baker is a broken man. He can barely feed himself, let alone provide reliable testimony." "He's also the only living witness to the Ghost Rider's methods," Charlotte countered. "If we're to understand what's happening now, we need to understand what happened then." "Cheyenne is in the opposite direction from Fort Laramie," Ellis objected. "But it may be less watched by Harkin's men," Archer said slowly, considering. "We could take the southern route to Cheyenne, speak with Baker, then approach Fort Laramie from the east, avoiding both Campbell's Pass and the main trails." Ellis stroked his mustache, weighing the proposal. "It's a significant detour, adding days to your journey." during which time Nathan remains in custody, preventing whatever scheme involves both him and me from proceeding, Charlotte pointed out. Time may be our ally rather than our enemy. After a long moment, Ellis nodded. Very well. Lieutenant Archer will escort you to Cheyenne first light tomorrow. I'll provide an escort as far as Western Junction, where you can catch the eastbound stage. As Charlotte returned to her temporary quarters to prepare for the journey, she felt a strange mixture of apprehension and determination. The man she had come to marry remained a cipher, either an innocent victim of elaborate machinations or a dangerous criminal who had lured her west for unknown purposes. Tomorrow would bring her one step closer to unraveling the truth, but also deeper into a web of conspiracy that had already claimed multiple lives. She removed Nathan's letters from her bag, rereading passages she had memorized during her journey west. Either the man who wrote these thoughtful, articulate pages was a skilled deceiver, or he was the victim of a deception so elaborate it implicated the army, the law, and even the grieving widow of his business partner. As darkness fell over the outpost, Charlotte made a silent promise. She would discover the truth about Nathan Blackwood, regardless of where that truth might lead her, even if it led to the gallows. Dawn had barely broken when Charlotte joined Lieutenant Archer at the stables. Captain Ellis had provided fresh horses and supplies for their journey to Cheyenne, along with an escort of 4 cavalrymen who would accompany them to Western Junction. "You should wear this," Archer said, handing her a worn cavalry jacket. "It's better if you're not immediately identifiable as a woman from a distance." Charlotte donned the jacket over her riding clothes, tucking her hair beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The disguise was hardly perfect, but might confuse observers at a glance. "Mrs. Spencer left during the night," Archer informed her as they mounted. "Said she preferred to continue to Fort Laramie immediately rather than delay." "That seems odd," Charlotte observed. "She traveled all this way, yet couldn't wait another day to speak with me further." "My thoughts exactly." Archer checked his weapons before securing them. Captain Ellis offered an escort, but she declined. Their small party departed through the southern gate, taking a little used trail that wound through dense pine forest. The damage from flooding was less evident here on higher ground, though fallen trees occasionally blocked their path, requiring detours. By midday, they had covered nearly 15 miles without incident. During a brief rest, Charlotte found herself riding alongside Sergeant Miller, the leader of their escort and a veteran of frontier campaigns. "Lieutenant Archer says you've been stationed at Fort Laramie," she ventured. "Have you seen Nathan Blackwood since his arrest?" Miller's weathered face remained impassive. "Briefly. I was on guard duty when they brought him in." "What was your impression of him?" The sergeant considered this. "Quiet, controlled, not what I expected from a man accused of slitting another's throat." He adjusted his rifle in its scabbard. "He asked for paper and ink to write letters. Colonel Winters denied the request, so he couldn't write to me," Charlotte mused. This explained the silence since her arrival. "The colonel's taking no chances after the escape attempt," Miller added. "You say that as though you doubt it happened." Miller glanced toward Archer, who was conferring with the scouts ahead. "It's not my place to question official reports, ma'am. But unofficially," the sergeant's voice lowered, "Winters and Blackwood have history, bad blood from during the war, something about a court-martial that didn't stick. Some wonder if the colonel is enjoying Blackwood's predicament more than is proper." Charlotte filed away this new information as they resumed their journey. The terrain gradually changed from forest to rolling hills as they approached Western Junction. By late afternoon, the small settlement consisted of little more than a stage station, a general store, and a saloon. "The eastbound stage should arrive tomorrow morning," Archer informed her as they dismounted. "We'll secure rooms at the station for the night." The stage station offered basic accommodations, a women's dormitory with 4 beds for female travelers, and a similar arrangement for men. As their military escort prepared to return to the outpost, Sergeant Miller approached Charlotte one last time. "Ma'am, there's something else you should know about Blackwood." He glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. The night before, they found Spencer's body. Blackwood came to Fort Laramie. He requested an urgent meeting with Colonel Winters, said he had information about the Ghost Rider. Charlotte's pulse quickened. What happened? The colonel refused to see him, sent him away. Next morning, Spencer was found dead, and Blackwood was arrested for his murder. Miller touched his hat in farewell. "Make of that what you will, ma'am." As the cavalryman departed, Charlotte sought out Archer, who was arranging their passage on tomorrow's stage. "Did you know Nathan tried to bring information about the Ghost Rider to Colonel Winters the night before Spencer's murder?" Archer's expression revealed nothing. "Who told you that?" "Sergeant Miller. He said the colonel refused to meet with Nathan." It could have been a ploy, Blackwood attempting to establish an alibi before committing murder. Or it could have been a genuine, Charlotte countered. Nathan may have discovered Spencer's connection to the Ghost Rider and sought help from authorities. "Speculation without evidence, Miss Webb." Archer paid the station master. "We'll have answers soon enough." That evening, Charlotte sat on the station's narrow porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in vivid oranges and purples. Archer joined her, offering a cup of coffee. "Beautiful country," he commented, scanning the horizon. "Hard to believe. There's so much violence and deception beneath such beauty. My father used to say that nature remains innocent, only people create evil," Charlotte replied. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been troubling her. "Lieutenant, were you aware that Colonel Winters and Nathan have a history from during the war?" If her question surprised him, he didn't show it. "Yes, Winters was briefly Blackwood's commanding officer before being promoted. There was an incident, civilian casualties during a raid. Blackwood filed charges, claiming Winters had ordered the killing of non-combatants. The matter was investigated but ultimately dismissed. And now this same colonel presides over the detention of a man he has reason to resent." Charlotte shook her head. "The more I learn, the more complex this becomes." "Justice on the frontier is rarely straightforward," Archer acknowledged. "But a bloody saw blade and financial records can't be explained away by old grudges." The rumble of an approaching wagon interrupted their conversation. It was unusual for travelers to arrive after sunset, and Archer instinctively moved his hand to his sidearm. The wagon came into view, a covered farm wagon driven by an elderly man with a woman in a sunbonnet beside him. They pulled up to the station, and the woman called out in a quavering voice, "Might we trouble you for some water? Our barrel sprung a leak back a ways." Archer relaxed slightly. "Of course. The pump's just around back." The old man climbed down, stiffly carrying a wooden bucket. As he disappeared around the building, the woman remained seated, fanning herself. "Mercy, it's a warm evening for spring." She smiled at Charlotte. "My, what a lovely young lady. Travelling far, dearie?" Before Charlotte could answer, Archer cut in. "Ma'am, where are you and your husband headed this late?" "Oh, just to our daughter's place near Table Rock." She gestured vaguely eastward. "Franklin's got it in his head we need to reach her before the next rain." Something about the woman's manner struck Charlotte as theatrical. Her movements too deliberate, her accent inconsistent. She cast a warning glance at Archer, who had noticed the same peculiarities. "Your husband's taking quite a while with that." "Water," he observed, stepping toward the rear of the station. Before he could move further, the distinct click of a revolver being cocked froze him in place. The elderly woman had produced a pistol from beneath her shawl, and her voice dropped its quaver, becoming hard and masculine. "That's far enough, Lieutenant. Hands where I can see them." Archer slowly raised his hands. "Harkin's people, I presume?" The Disguised man smiled coldly. "Got it in one, soldier boy." He called out, "All clear, boys." The elderly husband reappeared with 3 rough-looking men, all armed. The station master and his wife were marched out at gunpoint, hands bound. "Inside, all of you," ordered the leader, a tall man with a jagged scar across his cheek. "Seems like our boss was right about you heading to Cheyenne." Herded into the station's main room, Charlotte found herself seated beside the frightened station master and his wife while Archer was bound to a chair, his weapons confiscated. "Robert Harkin sends his regards," the scarred man said, removing the sunbonnet from his cohort. "Said you might try something clever after your escape at the cabin." "What does Harkin want with us?" Charlotte demanded, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Not us, Mom. Just you." The man grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Lieutenant, here is just an inconvenience to be dealt with." Archer tested his bonds discreetly. "Harkin must be desperate if he's risking the murder of a cavalry officer." "Who said anything about murder?" The leader laughed. "Accidents happen all the time. On the frontier, Lieutenant Archer tragically thrown from his horse while escorting a young lady. Very sad. Meanwhile, Miss Webb continues her journey with different companions." Charlotte's mind raced. They hadn't killed her or Archer immediately, which meant they needed something from them first. "Where's Robert Harkin, if he wants to speak?" "With me, he should do so directly. Boss is busy with other matters. Asked us to deliver you to him at Carson's Ridge." The leader gestured to one of his men. "Check upstairs. Make sure there's no one else." As the outlaw climbed the stairs, Charlotte caught Archer's eye. He gave an almost imperceptible nod toward his boot. Following his gaze, she noticed the handle of a small knife barely visible in a custom sheath. "I need to use the necessary," she announced, standing abruptly. The leader hesitated. "Madge, take her out back. Check her for weapons first." The man who had posed as the elderly woman holstered his gun and roughly patted Charlotte down, missing the small revolver Mrs. Patterson had given her, concealed in an inner pocket of her skirt. As they stepped onto the back porch, Charlotte stumbled deliberately, falling against her captor. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "It's been such a frightening ordeal." "Just be quick about your business," the man growled, gesturing toward the outhouse. Once inside the small structure, Charlotte worked quickly. She extracted Mrs. Patterson's revolver, checking that it was loaded. Through the slats in the wooden door, she could see Madge standing guard, looking bored and inattentive. Taking a deep breath, Charlotte fired through the outhouse door. The shot caught the outlaw in the shoulder, spinning him around with a howl of pain. She burst through the door, clubbing him across the temple with the revolver's barrel before he could recover. Inside the station, the shot had created instant chaos. Using the distraction, Archer had maneuvered his chair closer to the stove, where he was frantically sawing his bonds against a sharp edge of the metal. Charlotte crept along the side of the building, peering through a window. The leader was shouting orders, sending one man to check on Madge, while the other kept his gun trained on the station master and his wife. The back door opened, and the outlaw sent to investigate stepped out, gun drawn. Charlotte pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath. As he passed, she brought the revolver down hard on the back of his head. He crumpled without a sound. Taking his pistol, she now had 2 weapons. She considered her options. There were still 2 armed men inside, but the odds had improved. A sudden commotion from within the station told her Archer had freed himself. Gunshots echoed, followed by the sound of breaking furniture. Charlotte dashed to the front of the building, in time to see the 3rd outlaw running for the wagon. She fired twice, missing, but forcing him to dive for cover beneath the vehicle. Inside, she found Archer engaged in a brutal hand-to-hand struggle with the leader. The station master and his wife had taken refuge behind the counter, while the room itself was in shambles from the fight. The scarred man had Archer pinned against the wall, a knife inches from the lieutenant's throat. Without hesitation, Charlotte fired, the bullet grazing the outlaw's arm, his grip loosened just enough. for Archer to drive a knee into his opponent's midsection and reverse their positions. "Check outside," Archer shouted as he subdued the leader with a series of punishing blows. Charlotte rushed to the door in time to see the last outlaw climbing onto the wagon, whipping the horses into motion. She fired the remaining shots from both pistols, but the wagon careened away into the gathering darkness. "One got away," she reported, returning to find Archer binding the unconscious leader with his own belt. "He'll bring reinforcements," Archer said grimly, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "We need to leave immediately." The station master, finally freed, hurried to check on his wife. "There are fresh horses in the stable," he offered. "Take them. We owe you our lives." Within minutes, they had gathered their essential belongings and saddled 2 horses. The station master provided directions to an alternate route toward Cheyenne, a cattle trail that would add miles to their journey, but might allow them to avoid Harkin's men. "What about him?" Charlotte gestured to the trussed-up leader, now conscious and glaring murderously at them. "Lock him in the storeroom," Archer decided. "When the stage arrives tomorrow, the driver can take him to the nearest marshal." As they rode away from the station, the rising moon provided just enough light to follow the narrow trail. They pushed the horses as hard as they dared in the darkness, putting miles between themselves and the inevitable pursuit. "You handled yourself impressively back there," Archer said, when they finally slowed to rest the winded animals. "Most people would have frozen in fear." "Fear doesn't help solve problems," Charlotte replied, though her hands still trembled from the aftermath of violence. "My father taught me that. Your father sounds like a wise man. He is, I hope." Charlotte hadn't heard from him since his imprisonment 3 years ago. "He always maintained his innocence, just as Nathan does now. The difference is, I couldn't help my father. I might still be able to help Nathan if we can uncover the truth." Archer's expression softened in the moonlight. "Your loyalty is admirable, even if possibly misplaced." "It's not blind loyalty, Lieutenant. It's a determination to find the truth, wherever it leads." She adjusted her hat, wincing at sore muscles from the fight. "What do you think Harkin wants with me specifically?" "Something to do with Blackwood, clearly." Archer scanned the horizon for signs of pursuit. "The timing is too precise for coincidence. You arrive just after Spencer's murder. Blackwood is arrested, and suddenly Harkin is expending considerable resources to capture you. Could Harkin be the real Ghost Rider, worried that I might somehow expose him? Possible, but unlikely. Harkin's activities are well documented: regular banditry, stagecoach robbery, extortion. The Ghost Rider operates differently, with inside information and precision planning. They continued through the night, following the cattle trail through rolling grasslands. By dawn, they had covered nearly 20 miles, reaching a small creek, where they allowed the horses to drink while they ate a meager breakfast of jerky and hardtack from their saddlebags. "If we maintain this pace, we could reach Cheyenne by tomorrow evening," Archer calculated, studying the rough map the station master had drawn for them. "And then what?" Charlotte asked. "Visit Lewis Baker at the asylum, then continue to Fort Laramie to finally meet Nathan?" "One step at a time," Archer counseled. "Baker may not be lucid enough to provide useful information." They rode in companionable silence for several hours, each lost in thought. The landscape gradually changed to more rugged terrain as they approached the foothills that marked the eastern boundary of the territory. By late afternoon, they spotted a plume of smoke in the distance, a small ranch or way station. Approaching cautiously, they discovered a modest homestead with a central cabin and several outbuildings. An older man stepped onto the porch, rifle ready but not aimed. "State your business," he called. "Travelers seeking shelter for the night," Archer replied. "Lieutenant Daniel Archer, 7th Cavalry, and Miss Charlotte Webb." The man lowered his weapon slightly. "Military, eh? Got papers to prove it?" Archer produced his identification, and after a moment's scrutiny, the homesteader nodded. "Joseph Callahan. The missus and I don't get many visitors out here. You're welcome to the barn for the night." Mrs. Callahan, a slight woman with kind eyes, insisted they join the family for supper. Their teenage son Thomas stared openly at Charlotte, clearly unaccustomed to female visitors, while their daughter Mary, about 12, peppered Archer with questions about army life. "What brings you folks so far off the main trails?" Callahan asked as they ate a simple but hearty meal of rabbit stew. Archer and Charlotte exchanged glances, silently debating how much to reveal. "We're traveling to Cheyenne on military business," Archer said finally. "Had some trouble with Harkin's gang, so we're taking the less-traveled route." Callahan nodded knowingly. "Harkin's been growing bolder since the flooding. Territorial authorities have their hands full with disaster relief, leaving outlaws to run unchecked." "Have you had trouble with them here?" Charlotte asked. "Not directly. We're too small to bother with, and I've got an arrangement with the Cheyenne. They watch our boundaries, keep troublemakers away." Callahan gestured toward a colorful blanket hanging on the wall, clearly a native gift. "Respect goes both ways. Out here." As the meal concluded, Mrs. Callahan offered Charlotte their daughter's room for the night, insisting she would be more comfortable there than in the barn. Archer would stay with Mr. Callahan in the main room, ready to respond to any trouble. Later, as Charlotte helped clear the dishes, Mrs. Callahan spoke quietly. "You two aren't just traveling on military business, are you? I see how he watches over you, like someone protecting precious cargo." Charlotte hesitated, then decided honesty might yield helpful information. "I came west as a mail-order bride. My intended groom is being held at Fort Laramie, accused of murder. We're trying to uncover the truth before his trial." Mrs. Callahan's eyes widened. "Mercy, that's quite a tale." She thoughtfully dried a plate thoughtfully. "You know, we had a visitor pass through about a month back, a woman heading to meet her intended husband in Silver Creek. She stayed the night just like you." Charlotte's pulse quickened. "Was her name mentioned?" "Elizabeth. Elizabeth Graves. Pretty thing, but nervous. Said she was to marry a sawmill owner." Mrs. Callahan shook her head. "Never heard what became of her." "She disappeared," Charlotte said softly. "Between Cheyenne and Silver Creek." The older woman crossed herself. "Lord, have mercy, this territory devours the innocent. Did she say anything unusual? Anything that might help understand what happened to her? She showed me letters from her intended, spoke highly of him." Mrs. Callahan frowned, concentrating. "But there was something she mentioned he'd written about a surprise. Something important he'd discovered that would change their future together, just as Nathan had written to Charlotte in his final letter." The parallel was unmistakable. That night, lying in Mary Callahan's narrow bed beneath a handmade quilt, Charlotte reviewed all she had learned. The pieces of the puzzle were accumulating, but the complete picture remained elusive. Tomorrow, they would reach Cheyenne and hopefully speak with Louis Baker, the broken survivor of the stagecoach massacre that had claimed Sarah Mitchell's life. Outside her window, she could hear Archer's measured footsteps as he patrolled the homestead perimeter, keeping watch. Despite the danger pursuing them, Charlotte felt a curious sense of purpose. She had come west seeking a husband, but had found instead a mystery that demanded resolution. Whatever awaited her in Cheyenne, and beyond at Fort Laramie, she was no longer the same woman who had stepped off the stagecoach into the mud of flood-ravaged Silver Creek. That woman had sought security and respectability. The person she was becoming sought truth and justice, regardless of the cost. Cheyenne loomed on the horizon as Charlotte and Lieutenant Archer approached the territorial capital. After a day and a half of hard riding, the city's buildings, substantial structures of brick and stone, stood in stark contrast to the wooden facades of Silver Creek. Dusty from travel and weary from constant vigilance, They paused on a ridge overlooking the settlement. "We should separate once we reach the city," Archer advised. "Harkin's informants will be looking for a cavalry officer traveling with a woman. Where will we meet?" Charlotte adjusted her hat, which had served as an effective disguise during their journey. "The Wyoming Territorial Asylum is on the eastern edge of town. I'll secure rooms at the Cattleman's Hotel under an assumed name, then meet you at the asylum at 4 o'clock. He handed her a small pouch of coins. "For expenses and in case we're separated unexpectedly." Charlotte tucked the money into her boot. "What if Baker can't or won't speak with us?" "Then we've lost a day, but gained the advantage of approaching Fort Laramie from an unexpected direction." Archer's expression was grim. "With Harkin's men searching so determinedly for you, the element of surprise may be our best protection." They entered Cheyenne separately, Charlotte riding directly to the asylum, while Archer took a circuitous route through the busier sections of town. The asylum itself was a formidable structure of red brick surrounded by a high iron fence. Its windows, though large, were barred, giving it the appearance of a prison rather than a medical facility. At the front desk, Charlotte encountered her first obstacle. The administrator, a pinch-faced man with wire-rimmed spectacles, refused to allow visitors without proper authorization. "Mr. Baker sees no one except medical personnel," he insisted. "Doctor's orders." "Please," Charlotte pressed. "I've traveled a great distance on a matter of life and death. Just 5 minutes with Mr. Baker could save an innocent man from hanging." The administrator remained unmoved until a tall woman in a crisp nurse's uniform approached from a side corridor. "Is there a problem, Mr. Peterson?" Her voice was authoritative, though not unkind. "This young lady is attempting to visit Louis Baker. I've explained our policies regarding his care." The nurse studied Charlotte with shrewd eyes. "I'm Head Nurse Sullivan. Why do you wish to see Mr. Baker?" Charlotte made a swift decision to be completely honest. "My name is Charlotte Webb. I came west to marry Nathan Blackwood, who now stands accused of murder and possibly of being the Ghost Rider bandit. Louis Baker is the only survivor of a stagecoach massacre attributed to the Ghost Rider 5 years ago." Nurse Sullivan's eyebrows rose fractionally. "An interesting story, Miss Webb. Please, follow me." To the administrator's evident surprise, the nurse led Charlotte through a locked door into a corridor lined with offices. Once private, she spoke in lowered tones. "Mr. Baker is under my direct care. He suffers from severe trauma that has left him largely non-verbal and often unresponsive. However," she hesitated, "there have been moments of lucidity, particularly when triggered by certain words or images." "Have you tried asking him about the stagecoach attack?" Charlotte inquired. "Many times. He becomes agitated, sometimes violent." The nurse's expression softened slightly. "But you should know that Mr. Baker has one possession he guards jealously, a pocket watch he somehow managed to conceal during the attack. It's damaged, stopped at the precise moment the stagecoach was ambushed. May I see him? 5 minutes only, and I must remain present." Nurse Sullivan led Charlotte deeper into the facility, through wards of varying security. They finally reached a small private room with a single window overlooking an enclosed garden. Louis Baker sat in a chair facing the window, a blanket across his knees despite the mild day. He was younger than Charlotte had expected, perhaps 35, but his vacant expression and prematurely grey hair aged him considerably. His hands moved continually, turning and adjusting something she couldn't see. "Mr. Baker," Nurse Sullivan said gently, "you have a visitor today." No response, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. "My name is Charlotte Webb," she tried, moving slowly into his field of vision. "I'd like to ask you about the stagecoach to Dawson's Creek, about Sarah Mitchell." At the name, Baker's hands stilled. The object he'd been fidgeting with became visible, A silver pocket watch, its case dented and its crystal cracked. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice rusty from disuse. "Pretty Sarah with the blue ribbons." Charlotte knelt beside his chair, encouraged by this response. "Yes, Sarah Mitchell. She was on the stagecoach with you when it was attacked." "Do you remember the attack, Mr. Baker?" His eyes, previously unfocused, sharpened momentarily. "Stopped us at the narrow pass. 3 men with bandanas. The driver tried to run the horses, but they shot him." His breathing quickened. "Made us get. Outlined us up." "The Ghost Rider," Charlotte prompted. "Did you see him?" Baker's gaze slid away, back to the watch in his hands. "Ghost Rider doesn't exist." Charlotte exchanged a glance with Nurse Sullivan, who nodded encouragement. "What do you mean, Mr. Baker? The Ghost Rider was responsible for the attack." "No Ghost Rider. Just men. Just greedy men." Baker's fingers traced the watch's cracked face. "He took her aside, said he recognized her." Charlotte leaned closer. "Who took Sarah aside? Man in charge. No bandana like the others. Said he knew her, called her by name." Baker suddenly gripped Charlotte's wrist with surprising strength. "Not her real name, though. Called her Rebecca." "Rebecca?" Charlotte repeated, confused. "But her name was Sarah." She got scared when he called her that. Started crying, begging. Baker released Charlotte's wrist, retreating again into himself. Then the shooting started. "Mr. Baker, the man who called Sarah by another name. Would you recognize him if you saw him again?" For a long moment Baker said nothing, staring at his watch. Then, with painful slowness, he nodded once. "We have a photograph of Nathan Blackwood at the front desk," Nurse Sullivan said quietly. "Part of Mr. Baker's admission records. The Army provided images of local residents to see if any might trigger recognition. Could you bring it, please?" Charlotte requested, hope rising in her chest. If Baker could confirm that Nathan wasn't the man who led the attack, it would be a significant step toward proving his innocence. As the nurse departed, Charlotte noticed a change in Baker's demeanor. His rocking had intensified, and he clutched the watch so tightly his knuckles whitened. "Mr. Baker," she said soothingly, "you're safe here. No one will harm you." "Not safe," he mumbled. "Never safe. He found me here." A chill ran down Charlotte's spine. "Who found you here?" "Man from the stagecoach, the one who called her Rebecca." Baker's eyes darted to the door, then back to Charlotte. "Came dressed as a doctor, asked questions, said he'd come back if I ever told anyone." Nurse Sullivan returned, with a folder containing several photographs. She displayed them one by one before Baker, watching carefully for his reaction. Nathan's photograph showed a serious-faced man with intelligent eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. Charlotte studied it hungrily, her first glimpse of the man she had come to marry. Baker gave no reaction to this image, nor to several others of Silver Creek residents. "This is the last one," Nurse Sullivan said, presenting a photograph of Jonathan Spencer. Baker's reaction was immediate and violent. He knocked the photograph away with a cry of terror, then curled into himself, rocking and moaning. "That's enough," the nurse declared, gathering the scattered photos. "He needs to rest now." Outside Baker's room, Charlotte struggled to process what she had learned. He recognized Spencer. Jonathan Spencer was on that stagecoach leading the attack. "So it would seem," Nurse Sullivan agreed, "though Mr. Baker's testimony would hardly stand in court given his condition. But it confirms what I've begun to suspect, that Spencer was the criminal, not Nathan." Charlotte paced the narrow corridor. Spencer must have been the Ghost Rider all along, using the sawmill partnership to launder his stolen money, just as Mrs. Spencer claimed Nathan was doing. "Then why kill Spencer?" a familiar voice asked. Charlotte turned to find Lieutenant Archer approaching, having changed from his travel-worn clothes into civilian attire that effectively disguised his military bearing. "Lieutenant, how did you find me so quickly?" "Cheyenne, Isn't that large? And an Eastern woman asking about the Ghost Rider draws attention. His expression was troubled. I overheard your conversation. If Spencer was the Ghost Rider, as Baker's reaction suggests, then who killed him, and why frame Blackwood? Someone who knew his secret and wanted him eliminated, Charlotte reasoned. Someone who perhaps wanted to take over his operation. Or someone who wanted revenge for the Stagecoach massacre, Archer suggested, his voice tight. If Blackwood discovered Spencer was responsible for killing my sister and those other passengers... Nurse Sullivan interrupted this speculation. I believe there's something else you should see before you leave. She led them to her office, where she unlocked a cabinet and removed a medical file. This is Mr. Baker's complete record. There's a detail that may interest you. She opened the file to reveal the admission documentation. Louis Baker was brought to the asylum by Jonathan Spencer and his wife Martha. They claimed to have found him wandering near their property and recognized him as the missing passenger. From the Stagecoach attack, they brought him here, Charlotte asked incredulously, the very man who could identify Spencer as the attacker? By then, his trauma had rendered him essentially non-verbal, the nurse explained, and the Spencers were considered respected citizens. Jonathan was establishing his mercantile business in Silver Creek, and Martha was active in territorial social circles. The perfect cover, Archer muttered. Keep Baker institutionalized, where his ravings would be dismissed as lunacy if he ever did speak. Meanwhile, Spencer continues his double life as a respected businessman and Ghost Rider. Charlotte suddenly remembered something. Nurse Sullivan, has Martha Spencer visited Baker recently? As a matter of fact, yes. She comes quarterly to check on his condition and provide funds for his continued care. Her last visit was approximately 3 weeks ago. The timing aligned perfectly with Spencer's murder and the subsequent arrest of Nathan Blackwood. We need to get to Fort Laramie immediately, Charlotte decided. Nathan may have discovered Spencer's true identity and confronted him. If so, he's not guilty of murder, but of defending himself against a dangerous criminal. Archer nodded. We'll leave at first light tomorrow. We can be at the fort by nightfall if we push hard. As they thanked Nurse Sullivan and prepared to depart, an orderly rushed into the office, his expression alarmed. Nurse Sullivan, there are armed men at the front entrance demanding to see a woman matching this lady's description. Mr. Peterson is trying to delay them, but they've threatened to search the premises by force. Harkin's men had found them once again. Archer immediately moved to the window, assessing potential escape routes. There's a service entrance through the kitchen, Nurse Sullivan offered, maintaining remarkable composure. I can guide you there while my staff delay these intruders. As they hurried through the asylum's back corridors, Charlotte's mind raced. How had Harkin's men traced them to Cheyenne so quickly? And why was capturing her so important to them? They emerged into a delivery area where supply wagons unloaded provisions for the asylum. A stable boy was just finishing with a team of draft. Horses. We need your horses, Archer told him, flashing the badge from his uniform jacket. Military emergency. The startled youth nodded, helping them quickly transfer their saddlebags from their exhausted mounts to his fresher animals. As they prepared to depart, Charlotte turned to Nurse Sullivan. What will happen to Mr. Baker after we leave? If those men realize he spoke to us, I'll have him moved to our secure ward under a different name, the nurse assured her. His safety is my primary concern. With hasty thanks, they mounted and rode away from the asylum, taking a roundabout path to avoid the main entrance where Harkin's men presumably waited. They had barely reached the outskirts of Cheyenne when shots echoed behind them. They've spotted us, Archer called, urging his horse to greater speed. Head for the river crossing. They galloped eastward, toward the flat expanses that would eventually lead to Fort Laramie. Behind them, the pounding of pursuing hoofbeats grew steadily louder. Their fresh mounts gave them an initial advantage, but Harkin's men were gaining. There! Archer pointed to a narrow ravine cutting through the prairie. We can lose them in the broken ground. The ravine offered temporary shelter from their pursuers' line of sight and gunfire. As they navigated its twisting path, Charlotte reviewed what they had learned at the asylum. If Spencer was the Ghost Rider, and Martha knew about it, she might have killed him herself when he became a liability, she reasoned, raising her voice over the thunder of hooves, and framed Blackwood to eliminate a business rival while protecting herself, Archer added. But that doesn't explain Harkin's interest in you. The ravine widened into a small valley, bisected by a shallow stream. As they splashed across, a rifle shot kicked up water beside them. On the ridge above, silhouetted against the setting sun, stood a lone rider. It's Harkin himself. Archer recognized the outlaw leader's distinctive profile. He's cut us off. More. Riders appeared behind them, blocking their retreat. They were trapped. Into those rocks, Archer directed, pointing to a jumble of boulders near the valley wall. We can hold them off there. Dismounting, they led their nervous horses into the relative shelter of the rock formation. Archer's military training was evident as he swiftly assessed their defensive position and distributed their limited ammunition. We've got maybe 20 cartridges between us, he calculated grimly. Not enough for an extended firefight. Charlotte checked Mrs. Patterson's revolver, now reloaded. Why is Harkin so determined to capture me? What could I possibly know that threatens him? I don't think it's what you know, Archer replied, watching as Harkin's men established a perimeter around their position. It's what you are. What I don't understand. You're the third mail-order bride summoned by Blackwood. The first declined, the second disappeared. You're the only one who made it to Silver Creek. Archer's expression was troubled. What if the brides themselves were never the point? What if it was what they might be carrying? Charlotte remembered Harkin's words during their first encounter. The mail-order bride is our ticket to ensuring his cooperation. You think Nathan was using mail-order brides to transport something? The idea seemed ludicrous. What could I possibly have that would interest both Nathan and Harkin? I don't know. But Martha Spencer asked if you brought valuables with you, heirlooms, securities. Archer peered cautiously around a boulder. Maybe that's what this is about. Not you personally, but something you were unknowingly meant to deliver. A voice called from beyond their shelter. Miss Webb, Lieutenant Archer, there's no need for bloodshed. I just want to talk. Robert Harkin had dismounted and stood in plain sight, arms raised to show he was temporarily unarmed, though Charlotte had no doubt his men had rifles trained on their position. Then talk from there, Archer replied, keeping his rifle ready. We're listening. I've been misrepresented to you, Miss Webb, Harkin called. I'm not your enemy. In fact, I'm trying to save your life. By sending armed men to abduct me, Charlotte retorted incredulously, a regrettable necessity. You're in grave danger, but not from me. Harkin took a step closer. Martha Spencer is not who she claims to be. She and her husband were not simply business partners with Blackwood. They were conspirators. The Ghost Rider operation was there. Joint enterprise. You're lying, Archer called. Baker identified Spencer as the man who led the stagecoach attack. Of course he did. Because Spencer was there, doing exactly what his wife instructed him to do. Harkin's voice carried conviction. Martha Spencer is the true mastermind. She plans every robbery, coordinates the intelligence gathering, manages the financial side. Spencer was her lieutenant, and Blackwood their unwitting facade. Charlotte and Archer exchanged glances. Could it be true? The possibility had never occurred to them. When Blackwood discovered their operation, he threatened to expose them. Harkin continued. Martha killed Spencer to silence him, then framed Blackwood. And now she's hunting you, Miss Webb, because you carry the only evidence that could exonerate Blackwood and implicate her. I carry nothing, Charlotte insisted. I brought only personal belongings from Boston. Check your mother's locket, Harkin suggested. The one you wear always. Blackwood sent it to you, didn't he? A family heirloom he wanted you to have before your arrival. Charlotte's hand flew to her throat, where the silver locket had indeed hung since leaving Boston. How could you possibly know about this? Because Martha Spencer has been searching for it desperately. She's already been killed for it once. With trembling fingers, Charlotte removed the locket. It had been a gift from Nathan, arriving in a package just days before her departure. His note had called it a family treasure he wanted her to wear on their wedding day. "Open it," Harkin urged. "Not the obvious compartment with the photographs. The hidden one." Charlotte had assumed the locket contained only the small pictures of Nathan's parents, but now, examining it closely, she discovered a barely perceptible seam along the edge. When pressed, a third compartment opened, revealing a tightly folded piece of paper. Unfolding it carefully, she found herself looking at a list of dates, locations, and names. A record of the Ghost Riders operations spanning 5 years, with amounts and accomplishment notes in a feminine handwriting. That's Martha Spencer's record of every major robbery, including the stagecoach that killed Sarah Mitchell, Harkin explained. Blackwood found it among Spencer's papers and realized the truth. He sent it to you for safekeeping, knowing he was in danger but not knowing who to trust locally. "Why would you care about exposing the Ghost Rider?" Archer demanded suspiciously. "You're an outlaw yourself." "The Ghost Rider's operation has cast suspicion on every bandit in the territory, bringing increased military patrols and bounty hunters. Bad for business." Harkin smiled thinly. "And I have personal reasons. My younger brother was on that stagecoach with Sarah Mitchell and the others. He wasn't listed among the dead because no one knew he was traveling under an assumed name. Martha. Spencer's operation took him from me." The revelation stunned them both into momentary silence. Finally, Charlotte spoke. "If what you say is true, why did Nathan attempt to escape from Fort Laramie? Why attack a guard?" "He didn't," Harkin replied. "That was Martha's fabrication. She has influence at the fort. Her cousin is married to Colonel Winters. The escape attempt was likely an attempt on Blackwood's life disguised as a security incident. The pieces were aligning with disturbing coherence. Martha Spencer's convenient arrival at the outpost, her abrupt departure, her visit to Baker shortly before Spencer's murder, all suggested a calculated mind conducting a complex operation. "We need to get this evidence to Fort Laramie immediately," Charlotte decided, "before Martha can arrange another incident involving Nathan." "My men and I will escort you," Harkin offered. "You'll never reach the fort alone, not with Martha's people watching every approach." Archer's expression hardened. "And walk directly into your trap?" "I think not." "Lieutenant," Charlotte said quietly, "I believe him. Everything he's said aligns with what we've discovered." "It's too convenient," Archer argued. "He could have fabricated this entire story." "Then why not simply take the locket when his men had us surrounded at the station?" Charlotte countered. "He couldn't have known about the hidden compartment unless he was telling the truth." After tense negotiation, they reached a compromise. Harkin and 2 men would accompany them to Fort Laramie, while the rest of his gang maintained a visible presence elsewhere to divert attention from their approach. At the first sign of betrayal, Archer would not hesitate to shoot Harkin. As they prepared to ride through the gathering darkness, Charlotte carefully refolded the damning document and secured it in the locket around her neck. The man she had traveled thousands of miles to marry remained a mystery in many ways, but one thing had become clear. Nathan Blackwood was fighting a dangerous conspiracy, and he had entrusted her with the means to expose it. Fort Laramie lay a day's ride ahead, and with it, the confrontation that would either vindicate Nathan or confirm his guilt. Either way, Charlotte was determined to uncover the complete truth, no matter the personal cost. Fort Laramie appeared on the horizon at dusk, its flag hanging limp in the still evening air. Charlotte, Lieutenant Archer, and their unlikely escort, Robert, Harkin, and 2 of his men, approached cautiously, stopping in a stand of cottonwoods half a mile from the fort's gates. We can't simply ride in together, Archer said, studying the sentry positions through his field glass. Harkin is a wanted man, and your men would be recognized as bandits immediately. I didn't plan to stroll through the front gate, Lieutenant, Harkin replied dryly. My business is with Martha Spencer, not the United States Army. Charlotte touched the locket at her throat, feeling the weight of its hidden contents. What matters is getting this evidence to someone who can help Nathan. Someone who isn't under Martha Spencer's influence. There's a judge advocate named Hammond stationed at the fort, Archer suggested. He arrived recently from Washington to review military legal proceedings. Spencer's cousin, Colonel Winters, would have had limited opportunity to influence him. Harkin nodded approvingly. Sensible. But there's another problem. Martha Spencer herself. My sources indicate she arrived at Fort Laramie yesterday, ostensibly to prepare for her husband's murderer's trial. She must suspect we've discovered something, Charlotte reasoned. Otherwise, why send men to intercept us at the asylum? She's eliminating loose ends, Harkin agreed. Baker was one, you're another. And Blackwood is undoubtedly the most pressing threat to her operation. A plan emerged through careful negotiation. Archer would enter the fort openly, his military credentials ensuring access. He would locate Judge Advocate Hammond and arrange a private meeting away from Colonel Winter's oversight. Charlotte would remain hidden until summoned, avoiding Martha Spencer's notice. Harkin and his men would establish positions around the fort, prepared to intervene if complications arose. As darkness fell completely, a new concern surfaced. There's unusual activity at the fort, Archer observed through his glass. Extra sentries, patrols along the perimeter. Something's happened. Or about to happen, Harkin suggested grimly. We may be running out of time. Charlotte made a swift decision. I'm coming with you, Lieutenant. We'll request an immediate audience with Judge Hammond, presenting ourselves as having urgent evidence regarding the Blackwood case. It's risky, Archer cautioned. If Martha Spencer sees you... She may have already made her move against Nathan, Charlotte countered. We can't afford delay. With reluctant agreement from both men, Charlotte and Archer prepared to approach the fort, while Harkin and his men positioned themselves strategically around the perimeter. They would meet again at dawn at these same cottonwoods, if all went according to plan. The sentries challenged them at the gate, their manner more alert than typical evening watch. Archer presented his credentials, explaining they had important information for Judge Advocate Hammond regarding a pending case. The Judge Advocate is in conference with Colonel Winters, sir, the corporal informed them after examining Archer's papers. There's a situation developing. What situation? Archer asked sharply. The soldier hesitated, then lowered his voice. The prisoner Blackwood, sir. He was found unconscious in his cell an hour ago. Poisoned, the doctor says. May not survive the night. Charlotte felt the ground tilt beneath her. They were too late. Martha Spencer had already acted. We need to see him immediately, she insisted, stepping forward. I'm his fiancée, and I have information vital to his case. The corporal looked uncertain, but Archer's rank and authoritative manner prevailed. They were escorted through the fort's busy central grounds toward the infirmary, a one-story building near the officers' quarters. Guards stood at attention outside its entrance. Inside, they found a scene of controlled urgency. A military doctor directed two orderlies as they tended to a man on a narrow bed. Colonel Winters, a tall, austere figure with a precisely trimmed grey beard, stood nearby in conversation with an older man in civilian clothes, presumably Judge Hammond. And there, watching from a corner with a handkerchief pressed to her lips in apparent distress, stood Martha Spencer. Her eyes widened momentarily when she spotted Charlotte and Archer, but she quickly composed herself. "Lieutenant Archer," she greeted with appropriate solemnity. "What a surprise! And Miss Webb, you finally arrived, though under tragic circumstances. Before either could respond, Colonel Winters approached, his expression severe. "Lieutenant, explain your presence. You were assigned to escort Miss Webb to Silver Creek, not Fort Laramie. Circumstances changed when we discovered evidence pertinent to Nathan Blackwood's case, sir," Archer replied, saluting crisply. "Evidence that suggests he may be innocent of Jonathan Spencer's murder." The civilian stepped forward with interest. "I'm Judge Advocate Hammond. What evidence do you have?" Charlotte moved toward the bed where Nathan lay unconscious, his face pale but unmistakably the same as the photograph she had seen in Cheyenne. After traveling so far, after facing so many dangers, she was finally in the same room with the man she had come to marry, and he might be dying before her eyes. "What happened to him?" she demanded of the doctor. "Poison in his evening meal," the physician replied without looking up from his work. "We've induced vomiting and administered activated charcoal, but considerable damage has been done." "How convenient," Charlotte said, turning to face Martha Spencer. "The accused dies before trial, preventing any testimony he might offer." Martha's expression registered appropriate shock at the accusation. "Miss Webb, you're distraught. Understandable given the circumstances, but I assure you—" "Save your performance," Charlotte interrupted, reaching for the locket at her throat. "I know the truth about you, about Jonathan, about the Ghost Rider operation." A fleeting calculation crossed Martha's features before she turned to Colonel Winters. "Colonel, this poor girl is clearly overwhelmed. Perhaps she should be escorted—" "The evidence, Miss Webb," Judge Hammond interjected, his keen eyes moving between the two women. Charlotte opened the locket, carefully extracting the folded document from its hidden compartment. As she handed it to Hammond, she noticed Martha's hand slipping into her skirt pocket. "She's armed," Charlotte cried, just as Martha produced a small Derringer pistol. What followed happened with bewildering speed. Martha seized Judge Hammond, pressing the weapon to his temple. "No one moves," she commanded, backing toward the door. "Colonel, order your men to stand down." Winters appeared genuinely stunned. "Martha, what is the meaning of this?" "Your devoted cousin-in-law has been orchestrating stagecoach robberies and murders for years," Archer informed him grimly, "including the one that killed my sister. That document proves everything," Charlotte added, "records of every robbery written in her own hand." Martha's composure had transformed into cold determination. "I've worked too long and too carefully to be undone by a mail-order bride and a vengeance-obsessed lieutenant." She gestured with the Derringer. "I'm leaving with the judge. Anyone follows, he dies." Before she could retreat further, a shot rang out from the infirmary's open window. Martha cried out, the Derringer flying from her suddenly bloodied hand. In the confusion, Judge Hammond broke free, and soldiers rushed to subdue the wounded woman. At the window, a familiar figure appeared briefly. Robert Harkin tipped his hat to Charlotte before disappearing into the darkness. The next hours passed, in a flurry of statements, examinations, and revelations. Judge Hammond reviewed the document from the locket, confirming its significance. Colonel Winters, shaken by his cousin-in-law's treachery, ordered a complete investigation into her activities, including her influence over fort personnel. Under a doctor's care for her wounded hand, Martha Spencer eventually confessed to orchestrating both Jonathan's murder and the attempt on Nathan's life, realizing the evidence against her was insurmountable. Throughout it all, Charlotte remained by Nathan's bedside, watching for any sign of improvement. The doctor had cautious optimism by morning. The poison had been administered in a smaller dose than intended, diluted by the stew in which it had been served. As dawn approached, Charlotte remembered her agreement to meet Harkin at the Cottonwoods. She slipped away briefly, finding Lieutenant Archer already conferring with the outlaw leader in the pale morning light. "Blackwood will recover," Archer was saying, "and Martha Spencer is in custody, facing charges for multiple murders." "Good," Harkin nodded with satisfaction. "My brother can rest easier now." You saved Judge Hammond's life, Charlotte acknowledged. Why risk exposure that way? Harkin's smile was tinged with irony. Perhaps I'm developing a conscience in my advancing years, Miss Webb. More likely, I recognize that Martha Spencer's operation being attributed to the mythical Ghost Rider has made my own business considerably more difficult. He mounted his horse with fluid grace. Best we part ways now. I've arranged a temporary truce with the law, but it won't last beyond sunrise. As Harkin and his men rode away, Charlotte turned to Archer. Will you pursue them? Not today, he decided. Harkin may be an outlaw, but today he served justice better than the law itself managed to do. His expression softened as he studied her face. You should return to Blackwood. The doctor thought he might regain consciousness this morning. Back in the infirmary, Charlotte found Nathan stirring fitfully, his color marginally improved. She dampened a cloth and gently bathed his forehead, studying the face she had imagined for so many months. The reality was more careworn than his photograph had suggested. Lines of worry etched around his eyes and mouth, but she could see in his features the thoughtful intelligence that had shone through his letters. His eyes opened suddenly, focusing on her with momentary confusion before recognition dawned. Charlotte. His voice was barely a whisper. Yes, she confirmed, emotion tightening her throat. I'm here. You found it, he murmured. In the locket. I wasn't sure the message would reach you. It did. Martha has been arrested. She confessed to killing Jonathan and trying to poison you. Relief washed over Nathan's features. I discovered their operation by accident. Financial discrepancies in the sawmill books. When I confronted Jonathan, he admitted everything, wanted me to join them. His voice strengthened slightly. When I refused and threatened to expose them, Martha killed him and framed me. I knew she'd destroy any evidence I tried to give to authorities directly. So you sent it to me, hidden in a family heirloom. Charlotte took his hand gently. A significant risk, entrusting such evidence to a woman you'd never met. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Your letters revealed your character, Charlotte. Your intelligence, your resilience. After your family's misfortunes, I knew if anyone could navigate the danger and uncover the truth, it would be you. His expression sobered. Though I never intended to place you in such peril. Over the following days, as Nathan's strength gradually returned, the full story emerged. Martha Spencer had orchestrated the Ghost Rider operation for years, using her social connections to gather intelligence about valuable shipments, and her husband's business acumen to launder the proceeds. When Nathan discovered their scheme, Martha murdered Jonathan to prevent him from confession under pressure, then framed Nathan for the crime. The flooding of Silver Creek had been an unexpected complication in her plans, preventing Charlotte's direct arrival and necessitating Lieutenant Archer's involvement. But Martha had adapted, using her connection to Colonel Winters to monitor developments at Fort Laramie while sending hired guns to intercept Charlotte before she could receive Nathan's hidden message. She never expected you to persist through so many obstacles, Nathan told Charlotte as they sat together in the fort's garden during his convalescence. Most would have turned back after finding Silver Creek destroyed. I'm not easily deterred. Once I've made a commitment, Charlotte replied, watching a butterfly land briefly on a late spring blossom. Nathan's expression grew serious. Our circumstances have changed dramatically from what I described in my letters. The sawmill is gone, the town decimated. I have no home to offer you, nothing but uncertainty. Are you attempting to release me from our arrangement? Charlotte asked directly. I'm offering you freedom to choose a different path. One less complicated by the shadows of recent events. She considered this for a moment. When I responded, to your advertisement, I sought security and respectability after my family's disgrace. What I found instead was danger, deception, and the opportunity to right terrible wrongs. Hardly what you bargained for, Nathan observed. Perhaps not. But through it all, I discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed and formed bonds I hadn't anticipated. Her gaze flickered toward Lieutenant Archer, who stood speaking with Judge Hammond across the garden. The journey changed me, Nathan. I'm not the same woman who boarded that stagecoach in Boston. I can see that, he acknowledged. The question remains, what do you want now, Charlotte? It was a fair question, one she had pondered during the quiet hours at his bedside. I want to rebuild, she said finally. Not necessarily what was lost, but something new from the foundations that remain. As Nathan recovered, plans began to take shape. The territorial governor, upon reviewing the evidence of Martha Spencer's crimes, arranged for compensation to the victims of the Ghost Rider robberies, including funds to help rebuild Silver Creek. Nathan's name was officially cleared, and his property rights restored, including his claim to the water resources disputed by Victor Reynolds. Lieutenant Archer, his long quest for justice for his sister finally resolved, requested reassignment to the cavalry unit responsible for overseeing the region's recovery from the flooding. His experience with both military operations and local dynamics made him an ideal choice to coordinate between Army engineers and civilian reconstruction efforts. 3 weeks after their dramatic arrival at Fort Laramie, Charlotte and Nathan stood on a bluff overlooking what remained of Silver Creek. New construction had already begun, the distant sounds of hammers and saws carrying on the summer breeze. The Army Corps of Engineers had established a camp nearby, planning improvements to prevent future flooding. Reynolds has sold his holdings and left the territory, Nathan informed her. The new owner is more amenable to sharing water resources, equitably. And the sawmill? Charlotte asked. The foundation survived. With the compensation funds and a loan from the Territorial Bank, rebuilding is possible. Nathan studied her profile, his expression cautious. If that's still what you want. Charlotte considered the scene below, the destruction and renewal happening simultaneously. I came west seeking a husband and a home, she reflected. Found neither in the conventional sense, yet discovered something perhaps more valuable. And what is that? Nathan asked softly. Purpose, connection, the opportunity to help create something meaningful from devastation. She turned to face him directly. I still believe in the person revealed in your letters, Nathan, a thoughtful man building something worthwhile. If your offer of partnership still stands, I accept it, though perhaps with a clearer understanding of its challenges than before. His smile held both wonder and gratitude. The offer stands, Charlotte, though I warn you, it may be months before we have proper walls and a roof. Fortunately, I've become quite adaptable, she replied, with a smile of her own. As summer progressed into fall, Silver Creek gradually rose from its ruins. The rebuilt sawmill, smaller but more efficient than its predecessor, began producing lumber for the town's reconstruction. Charlotte established a school in a tent while the proper building was under construction, putting her education to use teaching the children who had remained or returned with their families. Lieutenant Archer became a frequent visitor, ostensibly to monitor recovery progress, but increasingly to spend time with Charlotte and Nathan. The shared experiences and dangers had forged a friendship that transcended their initial suspicions of one another. I've received new orders, Archer announced one evening as they sat on the porch of Nathan and Charlotte's newly completed cabin. I'm being transferred to Fort Riley in the spring. We'll miss your counsel, Nathan said sincerely. The two men had developed a genuine respect for each other's intelligence and integrity. Actually, Archer hesitated uncharacteristically, I've been authorized to establish a cavalry outpost near Silver Creek first. The Army recognizes the strategic importance of maintaining a presence here during reconstruction. Charlotte exchanged a knowing glance with Nathan. "How fortunate for all of us," she remarked, not bothering to hide her pleasure at the news. As October painted the surrounding hills in brilliant golds and reds, Charlotte stood beside Nathan in Mrs. Patterson's parlour, as the Reverend Williams pronounced them, husband and wife. The ceremony was simple, attended by the handful of townsfolk who had returned to Silver Creek and several officers from Archer's unit. Lieutenant Archer himself stood as Nathan's best man, a transformation none could have predicted when Charlotte first met him amidst the mud and ruins of the flood-ravaged town. Mrs. Patterson beamed with satisfaction, having maintained from the beginning that Charlotte would find her place in Silver Creek, though perhaps not in the way anyone had anticipated. That evening, as they walked along the creek that had given the town its name, Nathan handed Charlotte a small package. "A wedding gift," he explained. Inside, she found a new locket, similar to the one that had carried the evidence of Martha Spencer's crimes, but untainted by those associations. When opened, it revealed miniature sketches of Silver Creek, one showing the town before the flood, the other depicting the new community emerging from the ruins. "To remind us that what we build after destruction can be stronger than what existed before," Nathan said quietly. Charlotte fastened it around her neck, feeling its weight settle against her skin, a tangible symbol of a journey that had begun, with a mail-order bride advertisement, and culminated in a partnership founded on shared challenges overcome and truths hard won. As darkness fell over the valley, lights appeared in windows throughout the partially rebuilt town. Not all the scars of flooding had healed, nor had all the shadows of Martha Spencer's crimes fully dissipated. But life continued, adapting and growing around obstacles, finding new paths when old ones were washed away. Charlotte Webb Blackwood had come west seeking security and found instead a community in need of healing, a man wrongly accused, and her own capacity for courage in the face of deception and danger. What had begun as a practical arrangement had evolved into something far more meaningful, a life built not on illusions of perfect safety, but on the solid foundation of truth and shared purpose. The mail-order bride who had arrived at flood-swept ruins and news of murder had found her place after all, not in the life she had imagined, but in the one she had helped create from the wreckage of broken dreams and washed-away certainties. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.